Welcome to the Palestine Exploration Fund. For those of you who don't know us, we are the world's oldest society for the study of the ancient Levant. So, tonight I am very excited to have Nir Arielli here talking to us about the Dead Sea, which I'm sure you're aware is a most singular place. It is, in fact, I suppose one could say, an earthly singularity. I kind of like this idea because it is quite literally the point to which everything falls into from around the hills, and all the dust kind of ends up in this, and the water ends up in this kind of cauldron, which is the Dead Sea itself. And because of this position at the lowest point on Earth, it has a very unique geology, geography, and ecology. And this makes it a singularly attractive and interesting place for people to come to exploit its mineral and agricultural wealth, its benefits and its commodities. The PEF, unsurprisingly, right from the word go, was interested in the Dead Sea. Even before we were founded, actually, Charles Wilson, who was one of our founding members, when he was having a break from the Ordnance Survey of Jerusalem, set off a series of levels from Haifa on the coast. I think it was Haifa, seems a bit far north. But anyway, he measured from the Mediterranean down to the Dead Sea, and that was the point when the actual level of the Dead Sea below sea level was established for the first time. And he measured it at 394 metres below sea level. And now it's closer to 338, give or take a bit, depending. We're not quite sure. Anyway. And for several years before World War I, in the decades leading up to World War I, the PEF took annual measurements from a point at Ein Feshka, which is on the western bank of the Dead Sea, to see exactly what the sea levels were doing on an annual basis. So it makes sense for us to really get involved in something again to do with the Dead Sea. And Nir was the first researcher in through our doors after lockdown, when he came to start his research on what is now this fantastic, wonderful book. And I would highly recommend it to everybody. It's extremely varied in its content. Everything from archaeology to ancient historical sources to geography, geology, you name it, it's in here. Very readable. If there is nothing that you wouldn't know, it's got everything about the Dead Sea, but we're afraid to ask, put it that way. So, without further ado, can I please welcome Nir to talk more on this fascinating subject.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Felicity, for hosting us. I suppose I'm very happy, especially to have this event at the PEF, both because, as you pointed out, I did some of my research here. Also, when I just sort of, as an undergraduate student writing my dissertation, my mentor at the time, Ronnie Ellenblum, sort of guided me towards studying the PEF, so I'm kind of coming full circle, if you like. While I'm in the business of thanking people, I'd like to thank my editor, Joe Godfrey, who's sat in the corner, who's been absolutely superb, and also the subtitle of the book. That's Joe. I was quite resistant is a strong word. I was quite hesitant. I offered about 7 or 8 alternatives, but Joe stuck to it, and she is correct. Because I think, as the British saying goes, it does what it says on the tin, right? It gives an apt description of what the book tries to cover. So if anyone is writing a book right now, listen to your editor, they know best. Last thanks perhaps to James Williams, also from Yale University Press. James very kindly brought some copies of the book here. I look at you, you look like a very compassionate audience. You don't want James to be carrying a box away, so please help make his trip lighter. The photo, which Felicity masterfully turned into a poster, but this image and a lot of the other images that we'll be looking at were taken by my partner Vanya, and these are actually my two kids. Just so we're on the record, they're delighted with their fame. So we've done that. Let me sort of run you through some of the themes that I cover in the book. I of course won't cover all of them. A, because we don't have the time, and B, we do want you to read the book as well. So I will actually start with a view from the east, and I thought it would be fitting to start from the east simply because a lot of the accounts that we get from the 19th century onwards especially, they tend to start from the north or from the west. So quite often people will come from Jerusalem, either down to Jericho or directly down to En-Gedi or something like that. So I thought I'd do something a little bit different, and I also start the book on its eastern bank, so in Jordan. And this is a learned audience, so I don't need to repeat that. Often I record a lot of podcasts, and the first question is, why do we call it a sea? So you know it's not a sea, it's a lake, it's landlocked, it's very low. Very sea-line, very salty. So you can see wherever the water touches the shore, it sort of everything turns white. And the Dead Sea is in trouble today, but we'll get onto that a bit later on. One of my main aims with the book was to try to show how the Dead Sea can tell a few different stories. So it can tell a geological story, it can tell an archaeological story, it can tell historical stories of kingdoms and empires rising and falling. It tells an interesting religious story. There's sort of political stories, hydrological stories. So I try to do a bit of that throughout the book, and these are the themes that I will attempt to cover. So I think I'll start with some archaeology. So I think I ought to start by apologizing. I'm not an archaeologist, I'm a historian. But writing about the Dead Sea forced me to read a good deal of archaeology, archaeological studies as well. I play quite a lot with this notion that the Dead Sea and its surroundings, it's a very harsh area. It's very uninviting, extremely hot, especially in the summer, not much rainfall. The land, by and large, if you surround the lake, is not very good to grow anything. So, on the face of it, it doesn't seem like a good place for humans to settle. But nonetheless, already very, very early on, we see human settlements around the Dead Sea. And perhaps the most famous and most important place is Jericho. And in Jericho, archaeologists have found remains dating back to the Natufian culture, which comes just at the end of the last ice age, and is a really important transition point to kind of more permanent settlements. So one of the earliest permanent settlements was in this area, and it benefited from, and you can see some greenery in the background, from the fact that you have some springs in the area, and it creates an oasis with quite fertile soil, and that enabled early human communities to settle here already. And importantly, for the first story I want to tell you, is this structure here, which is the remains of a tower. Now obviously it doesn't look very high for a tower, but none of this was around at the time. This accumulated later on, so it was at the edge of the settlement, already in the Neolithic period. Took some time for archaeologists to discover the Neolithic chapter in Jericho's history. Felicity is probably a bigger expert on this than I am, but Charles Warren excavates here in the 1860s. You have a German expedition in the first decade of the 20th century. Later on, John Garstang, another British archaeologist. Importantly, Kathleen Kenyon comes here in the 1950s, and she's the first person to realize, because many of the early archaeologists came to Jericho to find Joshua's walls, right? The biblical story, that was the main attraction. But Kenyon realizes that the remnants here, the lower layers of the tell, of this mound in Jericho, are actually a lot older. So Neolithic, and she's very impressed by the tower, by the wall, which appeared to be sort of the earliest known of this kind. So Jericho gets this reputation of being the oldest city in the world, even though it wasn't exactly a city at the time. So Jericho is one example, obviously not the only one. There are other archaeological sites. Certainly by the Bronze Age, there are a number of permanent, quite important towns and cities around the Dead Sea. This is sort of one element that I cover in the book. But we mentioned Joshua. So let me turn to the religious significance of the lake and of the area around it. If you open the Bible, the Old Testament, you will find the Dead Sea and the area around it appear quite regularly. Quite a few stories happen around the Dead Sea. So whether it's the place where Moses passes away, Joshua, which we've mentioned, around Jericho, David twice, one as a fugitive and later on as a king, the prophet Elisha, and so on and so forth. But the one biblical story that looms large and really kind of dominates the area most of all is the story about Sodom and Gomorrah. So these cities of sin that the Lord destroyed, and the story about sort of Lot, who's spared, and he and his family move away, but his wife turns back to look at the cities as they're being destroyed, and she turns into a pillar of salt. Now this story, visitors that come to the Dead Sea area for centuries, even I can say for millennia, are looking for the remains of Sodom and Gomorrah. And there are all kinds of traditions and tales about where they once stood, whether they were around the lake, whether they were submerged by the lake, and of course, where is that pillar of salt? And I think quite a few, over the centuries, you've had tourist guides point at various features around the lake and saying, this is Lot's wife, this is the pillar, and this is one of them. This is on the sort of on a cliff above the eastern side of the Dead Sea, and we stood there for quite some time. Quite a few tourists come and take some photos. So this is one of the supposed pillars of salt. So there are tales by Christian pilgrims, Jewish pilgrims. There's also an Islamic tradition that links the story of Sodom and Gomorrah to the area, and one of the Arabic names of the lake is Lot's Lake, by Lot. The area is described as being overturned. So as part of the destruction, the land, the ground was overturned, and the people who reside in the area are called Lot's people. So there was a long tradition of viewing the Dead Sea in the area as being cursed. But as you've already figured out, I'm interested in paradoxes. So it is not only cursed, it is also blessed. Because if you move away just a few kilometers north of the Dead Sea, you come to the traditional baptism site. So the site that is associated with John the Baptist and the baptism of Jesus. So this image was taken from the west bank looking east. So you have on the western bank a place called Qasr el-Yahud, and on the eastern side you have Bethany beyond the Jordan. And here on the eastern side in particular, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of various churches dating back to the Byzantine period. So we know that already in that period, this place was associated with baptism. And it's got a really interesting political story to tell, all the way up to the modern and contemporary age. Up until recently, this side was basically a minefield, and there was a huge demining or mine removal operation that ended while I was writing the book. So now also the churches on the western bank are accessible again and have come back to the possession of the churches. So that is the baptism site. So the area is not only cursed but also linked to a notion of purification. You see already medieval authors writing about the purifying sort of nature of the Jordan River because of the story of the baptism. Okay. Now, the period starting from the conquests of Alexander the Great and moving forward was a period that saw the construction of really magnificent buildings in the vicinity of the Dead Lake. I assume you all know and heard of Masada, so we're not going to have a Masada photo. I thought instead to show this monumental building at Qasr el-Abed, again on the Jordanian side, north-east of the Dead Sea, that was built by the Tubaid family, so a Jewish family in the Hellenistic period. And it's really a period starting from following the conquests of Alexander the Great, a period in which strong dynasties sought to build, fortify, show their control, show their power, exhibit their power in the region. So we have structures like this one, or the grand structures that the Hasmonaean dynasty built, and later on, of course, King Herod the Great, who was very much into architecture, had palaces and fortifications all around the Dead Sea, including in places like Jericho, and of course he built the fortifications of Masada as well. The area around the Dead Sea is also very famous in connection to the Roman rule, and especially the rebellions against the Romans. There were two large Jewish uprisings against the Romans. The first one between 67 and 73 or 74 CE, and the second one in the early 2nd century, so a period where a lot of the settlements around the Dead Sea were destroyed. But following these destructions, the area and the whole country, the whole Levant for that matter, experiences a period where it flourished. So the population of the area grew very significantly, probably reaching a peak that wasn't surpassed until the 20th century. Agriculture expanded. We know this from archaeological excavations across the country. Probably they benefited from a slightly wetter climate than we have today, so it was possible to cultivate even areas that used to be quite arid. And we have some idea of how the whole Levant, and especially the area around the Dead Sea, flourished from the Madaba map, which also appears on the cover of the book. So this is a 6th century CE mosaic that was discovered in the 19th century, partially destroyed sadly, but still nonetheless shows us a lot of the Byzantine Levant, including boats that crossed the Dead Sea, so we get a sense of the amount of trade and commerce, and the lake was used for transport, much easier than on horse or camelback. So that is one element of the so-called Byzantine Spring. Another one, the Byzantine Empire after Constantine the Great, and the sort of centrality of Christianity. Because of that, there is a movement of, first of all, the construction of monasteries all around. This is just one example. Of course, the monastery you see is more modern. It's from the 19th century, but the caves overlooking Jericho, Mount Temptation. So there was a Byzantine monastery there, Byzantine monasteries dotted all around the lake. Some of them give you a sense of how lavish they were. So if you go to Mount Nebo, you can still see the mosaics there, which are fantastic, and give you a sense that this was obviously a relatively affluent place, which benefited greatly from the movement of pilgrims coming in. Quite a few pilgrims coming in to see the Dead Sea and the sites connected to those biblical stories that I mentioned earlier. So we do have this period where the Dead Sea and the area around it flourished. Things begin to change in the medieval period. A lot of the monasteries that I mentioned were either abandoned or at least shrunk in size. A lot of the settlements are either abandoned or again become smaller. And initially, scholars believed that this was linked to the Islamic conquest, right, in the 7th century. And the explanation must have been that the area had flourished, but this period of wealth was cut off. Today we have a more nuanced understanding. So we see that a lot of sites do carry on for quite some time after the Islamic conquest. So it wasn't the conquest itself that brought about this era of decline. As a matter of fact, we have a few places that are established after the Islamic conquest. One of them is Hisham's palace, just north of Jericho. As you can see, again, beautiful mosaics built in the Umayyad period, recently restored, so it's now got a dome covering it. Probably what led to this demise were a few factors working together. So the climate that I mentioned earlier shifts around this period. Rainfall decreases, and it becomes more difficult to grow crops, at least in certain areas. And another element happens, especially with the rise of the Abbasid Caliphate, that moves the center of power away from the area further east to Baghdad, is that trade routes probably shifted as well. So this becomes a bit of a backwater, and there's far less activity around the lake throughout the medieval period. There is some, for instance, all of a sudden a sugarcane industry begins to flourish north and south of the Dead Sea. But by and large, especially towards the end of the medieval period and the beginning of the early modern period, there are hardly any permanent settlements, and the lake becomes a Bedouin lake. So you've got a number of Bedouin tribes who control the area, and anyone entering has to seek protection from one or other of the Bedouin tribes. Okay, and this brings us to the PEF and the 19th century, this age of exploration. So obviously it's not just the PEF and not just British explorers who come to the Dead Sea. You also have German and Swedish and French and American explorers coming here, but they're very curious about the Dead Sea, about its special properties, its salinity, and whether any life exists in it. So throughout the 19th century onto the early 20th century, we see quite a few efforts to uncover some of the mysteries of the Dead Sea. One of them is cartography. So there's a conscious effort to draw maps like this excellent map from the survey of Western Palestine. This was not taken by Vanya, this was taken by me, so I hope you don't mind. So this is part of the survey of Western Palestine in the 1870s, and this is the area just north of the Dead Sea. And it was carried out by Conder and Kitchener. There was also in the decade before that this kind of effort to do this leveling survey, which you mentioned, from the Mediterranean up to the hills of Jerusalem and down to the Dead Sea. And throughout the few decades of the Dead Sea, there was this effort to understand how low it really is, and with these cartographic attempts and the surveys of the 1860s and 70s, they nail it. They understand that the Dead Sea is a lot lower than the Mediterranean, which obviously offers quite interesting opportunities later on. There's also an effort to understand the flora and fauna of the country. So Tristram surveys the country. He's especially interested in this area because he writes it is less well known. So it brings back a very interesting account of everything he sees around the lake. But the thing that caught me most, actually, in terms of exploration, was a slightly less known PEF explorer called Edward Hall, who contributes to the geology of the country, which is published in the 1880s. And he writes, he calls it dynamical geology. And what he's doing in effect, so plate tectonics was not yet a thing. So about 40 or 50 years before plate tectonics become a dominant, possibly even more, decades before it becomes a dominant kind of theory in geology, he describes what he sees in the Dead Sea, which in effect is plate tectonics. So he's already talking about faults and the movements in the crust of the earth, and he notices, possibly he's the first one at least to put it down, pen to paper, that there is a difference between the western side and the eastern side. So they appear to be not parallel. So we now know that the plate on the right and the plate on the left are moving in different rhythms. So this plate is edging up northward faster, so that the parallels of whatever you find here won't be here, but further up north. So really quite astonishing discoveries that he makes already in the 1880s. So if you like, the Dead Sea can also tell a history of science story. And finally, another avenue of exploration that is worth mentioning is the fluctuating level of the Dead Sea. So scholars were able to observe that the level of the lake doesn't stay the same. It rises and falls. Again, took some time to figure out, because in theory this is a terminal lake. This is a lake that has no visible outlet. Water comes in mainly from the Jordan, but the level doesn't rise and rise and rise. Instead, it stays pretty much the same, but it fluctuates all the time. So there was an effort in the later decades of the 19th century and the early 20th century to understand the mechanism. How come the level fluctuates and why doesn't it constantly rise? And here, this photo again from the PEF archive is very, very useful. This island here, Ujum el-Baya, was actually an artificial kind of breakwater that was constructed in antiquity, but it was a very good gauge to see how low or high the level of the lake was. So at certain times when the level was lower, it was connected. You could walk from land all the way out here. When the level was higher, it appeared to be an island, and sometimes it became completely submerged. And this riddle of the level of the lake was cracked thanks to the PEF rock. So in 1900, Masterman of the PEF kind of office in Jerusalem, I guess, goes down to the Dead Sea and marks this black mark on the rock. And then from this mark they could measure each year whether the lake had risen or fallen, and eventually he writes that it's down to evaporation. So evaporation controls the level of the lake. I don't have a good photo of the PEF rock. I was there with my family. My son, a rock climber, dutifully climbed up, but the photography skills he must have inherited from me and not from his mother, so not a great photo. Okay, right, and that brings me to a sadder story, which is the dying Dead Sea, the Dead Sea today. So it is not a happy story, I'm afraid. Because of dams and diversions upstream, the Dead Sea receives less than 10% of the water that it did historically. The flow down the Jordan River is but a trickle. And because of that, the level of the lake has been gradually falling by about a meter per year. I think this image here captures quite well these terraces formed by the lake level as it falls every year. And it has lost something like 40 meters since the 1970s. What have I done now?
That's all right, it's back.
That's okay. And also this image here, if you remember Ujum el-Bahel, this island, this is the island now, and it's about 1 kilometer from the shoreline. So the shoreline is retreating quite quickly. So I spent a lot of time in the book in reconstructing sort of where the water is, who siphoned the water and when. But the fact of the matter is that the Dead Sea is receiving far less water than it did. And if this continues, we won't have any Dead Sea at all. And the sinking level of the Dead Sea has some nasty side effects, the most notable of which are sinkholes. So already in the 1980s, there were occasional sinkholes forming around the lake. It took a few years for geologists to understand that this is linked directly to the retreating level of the lake. If anyone is interested in how this works, basically there were huge clusters of salt underground, and with the falling level of the lake, the water coming down from the hills flows deeper underground, melts the salt until the salt is removed, and then you have a cavity. And these cavities tend to collapse. And when they do, these sinkholes are formed. So starting in the 80s and 90s, the pace continued to quicken, more and more sinkholes. Today you have thousands of sinkholes surrounding the Dead Sea. Quite dangerous, but also a tourist attraction. So not recommended. This is highly unregulated, but if you're into high-risk tourism, they are very picturesque. They're very beautiful. Sometimes the water in them, depending on whether or not bacteria and algae can survive in them, change colors. So it is a lunar landscape, but with water. It's quite interesting. And this brings me to the last two themes. First of all, the lake. I haven't mentioned it now much, but if you're welcome to read more about it in the book. The lake supports a large mineral extraction industry. So there are huge industrial plants on the Israeli side and the Jordanian side, and they can extract various minerals from the salts of the Dead Sea. So potash that is used in artificial fertilizers, bromine, and a few others. And these plants are very profitable as well. So what they have done in effect is to turn the southern basin of the Dead Sea, the southern edge, which was quite shallow, into these large artificial evaporation pools. And it's the evaporation process that lets the salty sediments to gather at the bottom, and once sort of they move the water from one pool to the next, and eventually they are left with this substance from which they can extract the minerals. Interestingly, the hotels on the Israeli side, these hotels, are no longer sitting on the Dead Sea, they're sitting on an evaporation pool. And it's nonetheless creates a very beautiful scenery. So surfaces such as these, quite often you get sort of these, they call them salt mushrooms because they look a little bit like a mushroom. And apparently they're great for taking selfies. So there is an interesting tourist attraction here, but of course this is a man-made landscape now, at least in the southern end of the Dead Sea. So there is a tourist industry, and there is especially a health tourism industry. The Dead Sea has long been reputed to have health benefits, both the mud of the Dead Sea and the water itself. There are also a number of hot springs around the lake, famed already in antiquity but still active today, especially on the Jordanian side. So you get a lot of tourists coming to the Dead Sea, and they are especially recommended for people with various skin conditions. It has a unique atmospheric regime because it's more than minus 400 meters below sea level, so you get reduced UV radiation, so you get the benefits of the sun without or with reduced negatives. So that is where the Dead Sea stands today. It is still a paradox. It's a place of great beauty. It's a place of tourism, of health, but it is also a dying lake. And part of the reason why I wanted to write the book is I wanted to get some more international attention for the plight of this lake, and hopefully encourage the people in charge to take action as well. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic tour around a very unique part of the world. Who's been to the Dead Sea? quite a lot of you. Okay. Those who haven't, do go while it's still there. It is an amazing place. It's a quite unique environment. And I was just thinking, as you were finishing your talk, I mean, yes, this awful circumstance that we're in, where the lake, every time you visit it, it seems to be diminished increasingly. What is there any one solution? Are there multiple solutions? What do you think? You've written the book as a plea to do what?
There were a few ideas circulating about, I think nobody's really expecting to bring the lake back to the level that it was, let's say, in the time of the PEF rock, but at least to stop it from declining. That much possibly could be done. So there's a big project that was discussed for a long time called the Red Dead. So this idea of bringing water from the Red Sea through Jordan to the Dead Sea, that proved expensive, controversial in terms of environmental protection, and the extraction industry didn't like it as well.
Really? Yeah.
So that idea has been shelved. The idea that I am backing, and obviously it's not my idea, various environmental NGOs are promoting, the Israelis started to bring more water to the Lake Tiberias, the Sea of Galilee in the north. And they do it for a host of reasons. But part of the argument is that we can possibly release more water to flow down the Jordan, maybe revive the ecology of the Jordan as well, which is quite miserable nowadays, and allow more water to come to the Dead Sea. So there have been some proposals around that. I am connected to a few people who want to do a kind of a serious scientific feasibility test around that. But of course the hard sell will be the political one, because the solutions cost money, and no one wants to spend money. And it's also, as all of you know well, a politically complex space. So it will require agreement, which is not easily reached.
And presumably, does that mean, I mean, a lot of the water use of the surrounding countries comes from the Sea of Galilee as well.
Mm-hmm.
So would there have to be agreements in terms of water use?
There would, I suppose the idea is that we bring excess water that is not currently needed, and that excess could be released. But yes, I suppose the reasons why this water no longer reaches the Dead Sea are because the population of the whole region has risen dramatically. So people need the water for consumption, for agriculture, for whatever it is they do. But I think with desalination,
okay, so Mediterranean water.
Mediterranean water, opens up new possibilities. Again, desalination is not, it has problems attached to it as well, but at least we're no longer dependent only on rainfall.
Okay.
So there's more water that could be brought in. But yes, people will have to make some trade-offs. Maybe sort of they would get the water and give us back treated water, treated sewage water. It's a complex area, but one that I nonetheless support.
Any questions?
I would often wondered, and forgive my naivety, where was, in ancient times, I mean in early biblical times, what was the political power structure in this region? Was it a contested region between the Israelite kingdoms and its neighbors, or
It
or
was.
what?
Yes, it was. So the Bible retells, for instance, a story of King David fighting a big battle against the Moabites and the Edomites, which, according to the biblical author, he vanquishes. Later on, we know also from the Moabite stone, right, the stela that was found in the 19th century, that tells the story from the other side about battles between the Israelites on the one hand and the Moabites on the other. So it was a contested area. I suppose in some periods it was a borderland. In others it was just a lake that was part of a bigger kingdom, a bigger empire, and it was no longer contested. But
Any other questions?
Thank you for that. There was, sorry. There are quite a few streams though that go into the Dead Sea. I mean, you've got a fairly big water ingress from Ein Gedi, for example. I mean, has that decreased or?
So yes, the springs on both the eastern and western side, many of them are captured. So the biggest intake from this immediate area is the Wadi al-Mujib, the Arnon from the Bible. It's beautiful, beautiful creek, absolutely stunning. But that water is now dammed upstream, and Jordanian authorities allow some water to flow because it's a beautiful tourist attraction as well, but it's a fraction. En Gedi too, the water is used by Kibbutz En Gedi. One of the springs in this oasis is used for mineral water, sold as mineral water. So much of the water, even from the immediate surrounding area, is used and captured. We should say that Jordan is one of the most water-scarce countries in the world, with a population that has jumped massively, also because of them absorbing waves of refugees throughout the decades. So they need the water, they don't have the water, so I suppose it's quite easy to understand why they would build these dams and reservoirs and take the water.
Jeffrey.
What makes the water of the Dead Sea so salty? Because the water from the Jordan is fresh water.
That's true.
And are there other salt water lakes in the world similar, maybe not as low, but as a Dead Sea? What's the phenomenon?
There are other salty lakes in the world. I think that the Dead Sea ranks as like the third most salty. The one thing it's got going for it, because its level is dropping, it's becoming saltier, so it might be number one. It is salty because, for a number of reasons. First of all, there were previous bodies of water there. At one point, about 5.3 million years ago, it was connected to the Mediterranean. This connection was severed, and this became a huge evaporation area. So there's a huge salt sediment at the bottom. Some of it you can actually see because the land shifted. So Mount Sodom today is basically a mountain of salt that was left behind. So these previous bodies of water left behind salt sediments. And now for the last 11,000 years, since the end of sort of the last time that the lake diminished, you have this terminal lake that water evaporates and just salt stays on. So it's not only the previous bodies of water that left salt sediments, but also salt that has accumulated over 11, 12,000 years.
I wonder also if you have the water, the erosive effect of the water coming in through the Jordan Valley, which is essentially the lake bed, that Lisan Lake.
Yes.
And the soil in the Jordan Valley is incredibly saline. So all those kind of deposits are ending up in the Dead Sea, adding to its salinity as well.
Yes, so there are 2 or 3 springs around Lake Kinneret, around the Sea of Galilee, that are salty because of remnants of Lisan, this predecessor of the Dead Sea. So yeah, they too empty into the Dead Sea eventually.
Yes, please.
Could you please repeat the name of the early geologist who preempted the plate tectonics theory, because that interests me?
Edward Hull.
H-U-L-L?
H-A-L-L. Edward Hull.
No, Hull. H-U-L-L. He was the head of the Geological Survey in Ireland.
I'm looking, because I should know this, I'm a geologist, I've never heard about
Yeah.
this, that
So
anybody had actually done this.
yes, I'm not a geologist as well, but reading up on him, it's the little geology I know that this is a bit early to be saying.
He was a
this.
smarty pants.
He was a smarty
Yeah.
pants. Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes people had a glimpse into something which later became an accepted theory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's an example of
So
it.
he had obviously. It's a great lab to be working
Well,
with.
if you can see the different plates,
Yeah, he
I
was
mean, that's very rare.
He-
You can't,
yeah.
they're normally submerged.
very observant. So I traced a number of geologists and kind of very carefully worked their way towards Edward Hull, who really cracks it, I think. So there was a guy before him whose name escapes me now, but said, but you know, this would suggest that the crust of the Earth shifts, and geologists would hate that. So,
I mean, the mere idea that he was talking about the crust assumes that he accepts that there's some sort of layering,
yes,
which at that point would have been quite revolutionary in
yeah,
itself.
I think he was ahead of his time, certainly. Yeah, and working here allowed him to develop these ideas.
That's interesting, thank you.
John.
Yes, I enjoyed your talk very much. You mentioned the Hellenistic occupation of the land around the lake.
Yeah.
And I wondered if the Egyptians had ever been there, and whether there was any evidence of Egyptian occupation of the territory.
There is certainly of large-scale trade with Egypt, because in Jericho, Bronze Age, there's a lot of Egyptian artifacts. I think there's they even found sort of how do you call these sort of scarabs.
Yeah,
That's the word I'm looking for, which was made in Egypt, written in Egypt, and worn by somebody who must have been sort of the governor of
I mean,
of the area.
the whole Jordan Valley is hugely developed in the late Bronze Age by the Egyptian Empire as a kind of, the sites are developed as kind of garrison sites, but also entrepot sites where, you know, the wealth of the region is kind of collected to be shipped out to Egypt and elsewhere, used for trade and so on. Sites like Tel Sidea are developed specifically as they have buildings which are called Egyptian governors' residencies. They're Egyptian architecture in the Jordan Valley, so there's very clear Egyptian domination.
Interesting.
Also in Egypt, so the Dead Sea in the past, it has pretty much ceased in the last few decades, but in the past, periodically you would get blocks of asphalt floating up to the surface. And this asphalt, starting from the Nabateans, but all the way up to the 19th century certainly, would be dragged ashore, cut up and sold for various uses, from protecting tree trunks to the mummification process in Egypt as well. So certainly by the Hellenistic period, they're using Dead Sea asphalt as part of the process.
Thank you.
Just another question. What about the balsam trees? Do we...
Yes, that's the Dead Sea offers a number of mysteries. One of them is this mysterious balsam. So we know from classic authors that this bush or small tree used to grow by the Dead Sea, and they could extract from its trunk this oily substance from which you could make perfumes, which were of tremendous values and were very popular in the Roman era. So we know that balsam was cultivated around the Dead Sea, certainly in antiquity. Cleopatra wanted to control this trade, all the way up to the 7th century, and then it stops, it vanishes. For a while, the production of this balsam perfume moves to the vicinity of Cairo, but then it disappears in the 17th century from there as
We've
well.
got no idea what sort of plant it was.
So I think, I'm not a botanist, I'm not a lot of things today. I'm not a botanist. So botanists know which family it belongs to, but they don't know which specific. I think actually sort of one of the scientists I interviewed, she thinks she's managed to grow one. But the jury's still out.
Okay, how interesting. Well, I think on that note, it's time to thank Nir, again, for a really fascinating talk. And we'll move the discussion over onto the drinks and nibbles side of things. So thank you again, Nir.
Thank you.